I'm going to go ahead and start the spotlight here. Today is the first ever public Radius community call. As you probably saw in the news and in the headlines and on Threads and X and all of that, we just launched the new Radius open source project, and we are super excited after the past period now of getting Radius up to a point where we're ready to launch, to now be able to talk about it publicly. So today you're going to get to hear from a lot of the Radius team and get to kind of look at kind of why we launched, why we are a thing, and kind of where we come from, and it's more especially kind of where we're heading. We'll take a look at the most recent Radius release. And then we're just going to have a big chunk of the today's community call just to be able to answer questions and kind of have just we like to keep the back half of the community call pretty informal, just to hear kind of what your thoughts are, talk through maybe some designs or some issues you're facing, but just be available to chat. Throughout the call today, we welcome, please jump into the chat and ask questions. We have the Radius team here that'll be typing away as we kind of work our way through the content. So we very much welcome the chats and questions there. Also, we love reactions. If you like something, give a thumbs up. If you think something's awesome, the wow reaction. We love to see the engagement and kind of hear from the community. Today's agenda, we have about 55-minute call today. We're going to be doing just a welcome, kind of talking through the format of today's call. We're going to be talking about our launch, kind of the biggest news of the past few weeks. And then we'll touch on a couple places, kind of how to navigate Radius, some important links, kind of where to find us on GitHub and in documentation and those types of things. We'll take a look at the most recent v.026 release, some of the new things there. We'll kind of talk through what our release cadence will look like kind of going forward. And then we have some awesome demos. We have some of the Radius team members here today that'll kind of just walk through some new functionality in Radius, as well as for those of you who are new to Radius and just found out, we'll also just be walking through kind of our getting started with Radius experience and how to get up and running. With that, we'll jump right into kind of a welcome. This call is definitely for you as the attendee in the community. We love to just hear questions and walk through designs and really just jump into anything we can for Radius. As I was mentioning, we love being active in chat. Ask us questions. We're also testing out a new format with this webinar, so I think you should be able to raise your hand if you have any questions, and we can do kind of questions and everything along the way. But we do have that dedicated Q&A at the end. But if you have any operating questions, definitely throw them in the chat. And so with that, the first question, kind of the first topic we'll dive into is just a little bit about us, kind of myself. First of all, my name is Aaron Crofis. I'm a product manager. I'll do a quick intro. We're from what's known as the Azure Incubations team. You may have heard of us before if you've ever used a project like Kata, Kubernetes Event-Driven Autoscaling, or Dapr, the Distributed Application Runtime, or even one of our newest projects, Copa, which Project Copacetic for container image patching, which is another project that perhaps one of these community calls we can talk a little bit more about some of our projects. But the most recent one, which as of 2 weeks ago just launched, is Radius, and why we're here today. But really, the goal of the Azure Incubations team is to not just partner across Microsoft, but really partner across the open source community to really explore and deliver technologies that deliver impact for cloud native applications and cloud native computing, but also cloud computing and just the industry in general. Kata, Dapr, Copacetic, and now Radius are all addressing a lot of pain points and a lot of based on a lot of customer conversations we've had about how we can make cloud native application development or managing your applications easier. So if you've been familiar with the Dapr community and taken part there and have used Dapr in the past, I was lucky enough to join the Dapr team a few years ago, and now excited to be rolling in a lot of our kind of excitement and a lot of our experience with Dapr applications into Radius. But it's not just me on the incubations team. We have a like really great team that I think from all over the country and all over the world that have really made this Radius project and this Radius release possible. We snagged the screenshots from an all hands a few weeks ago, and so this is just a quick look at when we were in together mode from the Radius team from PM and engineering who all came together, and we were on a call right up to the 11th hour, making sure that we were ready to launch on the 18th. And we're all super excited to not only be here today, but also to really join with the community as we go forward. But yeah, and so in terms of what is Radius and where you can kind of get started, we have a great video that I'd recommend. We'll send these links out as a follow-up with the community call recording as well. But the two Ryans, Ryan Waite and Ryan Nowak, our director and architect and creator respectively, who are on the call today, we have a version of the video here that still very much up to date that will kind of walk you through the motivations and the background as well as the goals and the problem space of Radius. Highly recommend. We'll send this out with our links afterwards, but it's a great about 30 or 40-minute video that we'll be posting a little bit more as well. So yeah, that's how you can kind of understand like the long form. I personally love watching these types of videos at like 1.5 speed, and that's how I love consuming information. So if that's your style, definitely check this out. But we also have some of our recent blog posts, if more kind of like reading and everything is more your style as well. So we also on October 18th we launched Radius with a blog post penned by our Chief Technology Officer and Technical Fellow Mark Russinovich. So there's a link on the screen. You should be able to click that in your browser and bookmark that for a bit. We'll send it out. That kind of walks through our recent launch with some information from some of our partners on kind of how they're leveraging Radius along the way. We also have a deeper kind of intro to Radius that's posted both on our blog site, blog.radapp.io, as well as on the Azure blog as well. So if you want a slightly longer form, kind of going in deep, in depth, Will Tsai from our team, and I helped pen some of that. But yeah, Will goes in depth on a lot of kind of digging into Radius with some diagrams and some overviews. So another super handy link to have. But the really cool part about the Azure Incubations team and the kind of how we're able to launch these open source projects is we really want to partner with the community and bring on as many external contributors and really make Radius not just from the Microsoft and Azure Incubations team, but make it an industry project. And that's why just the other day, we were able to open up a submission. Jonathan from our team submitted Radius to be a new CNCF sandbox project, which means that we'll be hopefully here soon starting the process of donating the Radius project to an open foundation like the Linux Foundation and then CNCF. So that way, we will make Radius vendor neutral and make it a project which we hope to bring on additional contributors and maintainers as well. So you can check out that application at that link. So yeah, and then in terms of some more content, because we'll get this curated and sent out, but we also were some most recent news at the Linux Foundation Member Summit. Mark Russinovich and Ryan Nowak and one of our partners over at BlackRock did an amazing overview and then demo session on Radius, kind of talking through a little bit more about it and kind of a really great hands-on demo. So another link, and I'll add this to the list of links that we send out afterwards. But if you again, like similar to me, if you really enjoy kind of those like conference style talks, this was a great one. But we also have a lot of press coverage. We've kind of been tracking a lot of the news from ZDNet, TechCrunch, Forbes, InfoWorld, kind of talking through kind of the Radius. So it's been a crazy few weeks. I know the Radius team, we've been kind of around the clock, just making sure that we address any sort of issues and patches and making sure that everyone can join in the Radius community, which we are again excited. I think is I've used it a bunch, but I think it just really reinforces that this has been a crazy few weeks and we're just getting started and we're having a lot of fun. So really looking forward to jumping in. In terms of now kind of the next section of our agenda, Now that we've kind of talked about how we got up to today, how can we stay engaged with the Radius community? Some useful links for you is going to be our documentation, docs.radup.io. This is how you can get some getting started guides, tutorials, how-to guides, some great concept docs that go through kind of some more information on like why Radius and how we kind of position ourselves and frame ourselves in the industry. You can also go to our GitHub project, check out our source code, open bugs, open issues. We love feedback and bug reports and feature requests. So don't be shy, jump right in. Let us know kind of what you like, what you may not like, how we can improve. We do daily triage of every single issue that comes in. So within 24 hours, we will have eyes on that and get you a response to let you know kind of our thoughts, and very often we will get it right on our engineering backlog. Or we also welcome contributions. We've already had now multiple pull requests into our project for not just like typo fixes and documentation, but also functionality. We were amazed to see some of our backlog items being picked up, and we were jumping in and helping everyone. We're working out a lot of our forking process and a lot of our contribution guidelines, but super excited. We love to help you along the way. We'll jump right in and kind of help you navigate the code base, help you navigate all the unit tests and functional tests. We really want to make sure that any of the friction we can remove along the way is taken care of, because we don't just want to make sure we grow our user base of Radius. We also want to make sure that it's a great place to contribute to as well, whether that be a typo fix if you notice something, or whether that be some new functionality. And especially like in the documentation, which Reshma from our team will be showing here in a few seconds, we even put like just deep links on the top right of every docs page to edit this page, because if you notice something that's missing or a typo or just any issue whatsoever, we that edit this page. We very much welcome contributions there. So with that, I'll actually hand it over for just a quick overview of our documentation from Reshma, from one of the other product managers on our team, to walk through some of the docs there.
Thanks, Erin. Let me share my screen here. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. So just a quick intro. I'm Reshma. I'm a product manager with the Radius team. So I'll just like quickly give you a walkthrough on our documentation. So we follow the Dyad Axis framework to approach the framing up and categorization of our documentation. If you look at our documentation, you can find 4 types of content here. One is the concepts and the overview docs, which is basically explanatory kind of material. It gives you context on the whys of why something exists, right? Why Radius exists, why a certain feature or a decision was made in a certain way. So you can find these concept docs under the concept section. And then the other explanatory content that we have is around the overviews. So these give an overview of the feature or a topic area, which are basically found under the how-to guides under each of the like feature area or the topic area. And the second kind of content that we have is the tutorials, which are basically a step-by-step walkthrough for the user to educate on the various parts of Radius. For example, if you go through these tutorials, you can get a step-by-step like instruction on how to execute certain thing, and then like understand or like get context on the various like topics or brief like parts of Radius. Um, the third type of content that we have here is the how-to guides, which are basically like positioned to accomplish a specific goal. For example, if you want to make your containers connect to dependency in your application, this how-to guide will walk you through those steps. Or if you want to like set up a secret store or like set up a gateway, there are like how-tos to accomplish a specific like goal or a task. And then the fourth type of content that we have is the reference material. These are basically your resource schemas, the CLI specification or the Radius API specification. These will let you like become hands-on on the project and get like more in-depth details into the nitty-gritty details of like the schemas and the reference materials. So that's on the content, and on the feedback, as Aaron was saying, each of these pages have a way to like give feedback. For example, we have deep linked all these links. For example, if you notice some kind of a typo or like mistake on this page, you can click on edit this page link, which will take you to the particular page wherein you can like commit your changes and push in the PR. If you notice that there's some gap in the existing content, and if you like to like see new content, or some pages have issues wherein the content is not loading, then you can click on this new docs issue, which directly takes you to our docs repo. So you can like use one of these templates here and file in the content, like the proposal that you might have on the content. And if you actually like use one of our tutorials or like how to's, and if you face any kind of like functional issues or bugs, you can click on this new project issue, which will take you to a Redis repo where you can file a bug report, or if you want any kind of improvement that needs to be made on the project, you can submit those here as well. So we did see a lot of like contributions on our documentation. We would like to see a lot of them in the coming weeks as well. So keep the feedback coming in. So that's on the documentation. Any questions so far?
Cool. Yeah, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. Thank you, Reshma. Yeah, that's we've been super excited. We've been spending a lot of time on the PM team, making sure that our documentation hits all the points we want, but we still know that there's a lot of content we still want to hit. So take a look at the docs repo, the open issues, upvote things that you want to see, open issues, and just like all of our issues in GitHub, we triage those daily. So every single day, every morning, we take a look at every single issue that comes into our GitHub. So with that, I'm going to bring up the slides one more time. I'll get those up and running here. Perfect. Go ahead and resume. So that's a quick look at kind of how to navigate our oh, and one more call out is our Discord server. If you haven't joined yet, we are active, like the Radius team is super active, making sure that if you have any issues, we actually were just troubleshooting user permissions error due to how macOS handles group memberships for admins. That was a fun one. So we are very active in our Discord server, kind of troubleshooting and digging into issues as they pop up. So jump in there, ask questions, show off some of your cool ratified applications, ask us questions, all sorts of stuff. We are very excited to jump in there. That's kind of our general purpose if you just want to chat or ask questions. But yeah, so in terms of kind of the next phase of the agenda item we have, let's take a look at our most recent v0.26 release. Now, the first question you might have is, didn't you just launch? How do you already have 26 releases? And the cool thing is we've been actually iterating for the past couple years, starting out very, very small and making sure that Radius is in a state where it addresses the problems that we set out, addresses those goals, and gets it into a state where it's not complete. We say in our documentation that we released Radius at a point where we felt like the vision was very strong. We'll talk a little bit about application graph and recipes and some of the features of Radius. So it's in a state where we are very much proud and very much excited to share our vision and where we're heading. But at the same time, there's still a lot of things that we are really looking for now feedback and input from the community, looking for contributors, looking for partners, as we now kind of get ourselves ready for our eventual like 1.0 release, which don't have a date on that because we're still gathering a lot of feedback. But yeah, we've been iterating. We do monthly releases. So every single month we cut a release. So we follow that cadence. And so we have our kind of release schedule on the release train. So you can expect 0.27 to come out, I think, the back half of next week. So there we'll get 0.27 out, and then 0.28 will be, well, with Thanksgiving and some of the holidays coming up, that might shuffle some things, but for the most part, every 4 weeks, you'll expect a new release. But yeah, in terms of 0.26, a couple line items is the first one is we switched from kind of our private like blob storage and some stuff we were using to host our private preview to now our public assets. So you may notice that we're using GitHub Container Registry, we're using OCI artifacts, we're hosting all of our things on GitHub. For a couple different reasons. One is we just want to make sure that everything is publicly accessible. We want to kind of reduce our kind of sprawl of different accounts and assets and all of that, and just making sure that Radius from a supply chain point of view is as secure as possible. We're lucky enough that we have a lot of security experts on our team from various different backgrounds, and so you'll notice along the way that like security is very much top of mind, and so just reducing and making sure that everything just works extremely well on GitHub and is private is a huge priority for us. So there's been some really cool chats in Discord actually about kind of how we're actually leveraging like GitHub Container Registry as a open container initiative or object storage for all of our binaries, and doing a lot of these different ways of leveraging these assets. So let us know. We're still working out a couple different little details here and there. We're actually working with the Auras team to making sure that everything is as seamless as possible. So there's a couple patch releases where we're just trying to make sure everything is as seamless as it can be. Next up, we have a new feature. We'll dig into kind of what our environments and some of the details here in the demo here in just a few minutes. But one of those is a new thing called simulated environments, which we can talk about in a little bit. But it allows us to kind of do like what if scenarios and understand how applications and environments play together. So that was something that actually came in from one of our end users and partners that we're working with. And another demo, which we'll actually show here in a little bit, is Helm annotation support, and which we'll, again, kind of frame up with here as we talk about Radius applications. We'll mention how that fits in, so just in a few minutes here. And then finally, updated contribution guides. As I mentioned, we love contributions, everything from typo fixes to actually new functionality. So I'll send some links, and maybe we can demo this in a few minutes about some of the kind of guides for how to do your first commit and how to get up and running kind of in an environment with Radius. We're all written in Go and use a lot of the Go tool chains. And we even have code spaces for all of our different environments. So we're just trying to make sure the barrier between, hey, this thing isn't working, or hey, I really need this functionality, into writing your first commit to add functionality, we want that to be super seamless. So we'll have to demo that here sometime. But the 0.26 release was actually much bigger. Those were just the highlights. The team was hard at work over the prior 4 weeks, like really diving in. A lot of these are just addressing very much direct feedback, direct bug reports, questions, issues. I'd say the overwhelming majority of our backlog right now is just making sure that everyone in the community has exactly what they need to get up and running with Radius. And every month, we also like to shout out our new contributors. So we had 3 new contributors in this last release, Nicole, Jonathan, and Reshma. When they were kind of getting up and running with Radius and getting ready for our launch, we were hard at work just updating docs and adding new functionality. So we saw 3 new faces in our Radius repo going in and contributing. So every month, I think we already have like 4 or 5 at least new contributors just in the past few days. So I'm hoping next month to see this slide filled up as high as it can, because we're like just the amount of contribution and all of that has been extremely exciting. With that, yeah, we're now kind of at the point where I think we're going to be ready to start showing a demo here in a few minutes. I noticed that Ryan Nowak, one of the architect and creator of Radius, just hopped on the call. If Ryan, do you need a few minutes to prep a demo? Are you ready to hop in? I know you just joined.
Give me 2 minutes.
Not a problem. Yeah, so I'll actually just jump ahead one slide and we'll get right to that demo. But in terms of kind of, there was a couple questions in the chat about KubeCon and Ignite and how we can kind of keep in touch as we move over the next. This is going to be a busy fall between all the conferences and all the talks and everything. We have a dedicated Ignite breakout session. The cool part is you can actually sign up for Ignite for free virtually. I believe this one will be streamed out and made available online afterwards. So make sure to check that out. This one will be led by Mark Rusinovich, our CTO of Azure, and Brendan Burns, who heads a lot of the cloud native teams here at Microsoft and was also one of the co-founders and co-creators of Kubernetes. The two of them will be leading a breakout session on Radius at Ignite. Mark will also be sitting down with an interview, kind of talking about the incubations team, about a lot of the open source projects that are in this space. So highly recommend checking that out as well. That I think it'll be about a 25-minute interview. We're going to be at Ignite. Keep an eye out for me. I'm going to be running around, be at the Microsoft booth and the open source, or at the open source booth at Ignite. I'll just be wearing the same shirt the whole time. Hopefully be able to have time to do laundry every night, so I'm not too gross by the last day. But yeah, come flag us down. If you see someone in a Radius shirt, just like come say hi. We'd love to just chat and meet, make a lot of connections along the way. And I think I signed up on Ignite at least if you want to sit down and kind of talk about some opportunities for Radius or maybe have a one-on-one chat. I know that there's kind of you can sign up to chat with some of the experts and some of the speakers from Ignite. So feel free to book a time. I did a bunch of those at Build and had a lot of fun and met a lot of people that way. So check that out. And then next week at KubeCon, Ryan, our architect, Ryan, our director, and Jonathan, the head of PM here on the incubations team, they're all going to be in Chicago. Hopefully they'll have some Radius swag on where you can flag them down. I believe Monday morning, is that Jonathan? You're going to be doing an overview session of Radius at the Microsoft booth?
Yeah, Monday morning is when we meet with the technical advisory group from the CNCF. And then there'll be presentations at the Microsoft booth the following days.
Fantastic. I've also heard a rumor that there might be some Radius stickers involved, so go find Jonathan. He is the holder of the possible stickers.
Yeah, as long as we intersect at my hotel, the sticker package and myself, you guys are welcome to it. So I hope to see you there.
Cool. So yeah, it's going to be a very fun.
Okay, I'm
fall.
ready, Aaron.
Oh, fantastic. Cool. And then, but yeah, the last two links, join us, follow us on Threads and X, formerly Twitter. We're going to be posting a lot over the next few weeks and months and hopefully years for just about awesome things you can do with Radius, new case studies and blog posts and community calls. And I've been actively retweeting as much as I can from all of the great kind of commentary and press coverage. So join us there. And yeah, with that, I think it's ready. We're ready for a demo now. So I'll hand it over to Ryan, who will kind of walk us through Radius, some new stuff, and and take a quick look.
Hey folks, sorry, I'm a little damp this morning. I coming in a little bit late. But let me show you demo. And I think since time is a little bit short, maybe if you have questions, maybe leave your questions in chat and Aaron will try to answer them. I wanted to, since this is our first community call, since going open source, I wanted to show a lot of things that we've shown before and kind of give like a proper introduction to Radius, just since this is the first call. And we'll probably do more interesting, for those that have been hanging around a while, we'll probably do more interesting kinds of things in future calls that you haven't seen before. And maybe there will be some things you haven't seen before if you have been hanging around a while. So with that, I'm just going to get into it. And kind of our narrative today is going to be about how Radius helps a developer work with an operations team or a platform team to get their app running in production. And we're going to kind of follow the perspective of the developer. We will jump in back and forth a little bit, but kind of follow the perspective of the developer, starting from the point where we first start using Radius to the point where we're deploying to the cloud. And we're going to deploy, the punchline here is we're going to deploy the application to kind of a local testing environment just on my workstation. And then we're going to deploy to the cloud in both Azure and AWS. And we realize that most folks don't literally deploy the same application to both, to multiple clouds. But for platform teams, they need to support a lot of different clouds often, even if individual apps aren't necessarily going everywhere. So you kind of think of this as an example of how we're providing tools in Radius that work the same no matter what cloud you're using. So to kind of get us started, like the first thing that I'm going to do as a developer is I'm going to set up a local dev environment just on my workstation. And the thing that I did off stage here is I set up a Kubernetes cluster. So I'm a particular fan of Kind. Others like K3D or Minikube or Rancher I know is pretty popular. There's lots of ways that you can get set up with Kubernetes. Could even be a cloud Kubernetes if you have that. But the key is that if you're thinking about development with Radius and kind of testing out your application, it doesn't really matter what you're using. We want to support all of those kinds of things. So I've got my Kubernetes cluster set up. I would run radinit, and what radinit is going to do is it's going to, first of all, it's going to kind of check everything, and second of all, it's going to, if you're not set up with Radius, it's going to get.
Oh,
We just
Ryan, you
lost
got
it.
muted.
I always do that. First time I have to hit a key. I'll say radinit here. And radinit with no arguments is really optimized for these developer scenarios. We call this the local dev experience with Radius. And so it's just going to ask you basic questions like, is this directory an application? If you want a more full guided experience that includes things like cloud providers, there's another variant of the command. You could say radinit full, and it's going to ask you a lot more information. So you can see that completed pretty quickly, obviously, because I have this already set up here. So I don't have to wait for anything to install. Let me jump over to my application and tell you a little bit about it. And this is a to-do application that's written in TypeScript. I'm a big fan of TypeScript. I bet there are some other big TypeScript fans on the call. And this is just running in Node.js. And I'm showing you a couple things here. I'm showing you a Docker file, and I'm going to show you some code where we read some environment variables. So here you can see I'm reading some environment variables from the process. I mentioned that this is a to-do application, and we're using Redis as a database. This particular sample can also do Mongo, but we're using Redis in this case. And I'm just getting these settings from environment variables. I've also already got a Docker file. And the reason why we're starting with an existing app is, well, Radius doesn't really care how you write and build your applications. And Radius doesn't really care how you containerize and build and publish those applications. So Radius, I think, becomes useful to developers around the time where you've got something working and you want to see if it works with real dependencies in a production-like environment. So you could imagine that I've written integration tests for this, and I've kind of proven that, or some unit tests and integration tests, and kind of proven that my application logic works. And now I want to try it out with real dependencies and verify that it's actually working. So one of the things that happened when we ran radinit is we said that there was an application in the local directory, and that's what this line here is about scaffolding. And so what Radius gives you as a result is Radius is going to spit out a file that's a lot like this. And this is because we know that a blank canvas is really intimidating, and so we're giving you a file that's going to run a container by default. Interestingly enough, for this demo, since I built the sample, this is already configured to do the thing that we want. So the app that we use for this tutorial is the same app as the main kind of getting started experience on our website. And it's also an app that we use to talk about Radius. So if I were doing this for real in a real code repo where I'm actually developing applications, I would probably do things like start customizing this, right? Like I'm probably going to use a different container image, one that comes from my repo. I might listen on a different port. I might have some environment variables to set. And if you kind of look in here in this container section, you'll hopefully see a lot of things that are really familiar to you if you've used these container systems before. So if you've done Docker Compose, you've done Kubernetes, or you've done ACI or ECS, like the way that a lot of these container platforms work the same, and we kind of expose the same settings as them. So hopefully that feels very familiar. I saw that Alex just joined the call, who's one of our friends who works on Bicep. I want to say a couple of things about Bicep. So the way that we describe applications right now in Radius, we have two ways to do that. One way that you can do that is with Bicep, which I've got on the screen right now. Another way that you can do that is with Helm charts or Kubernetes YAML. And you might be a little surprised if you've been following along for a while because you may not have seen that before. And I'm going to save some time to talk about that when we get closer to the end. So know that you could either, if you're building something new and you like the whole thing that we're doing here with Bicep, you could use Bicep for that and kind of work against our abstractions. If you're deeply immersed in the Kubernetes world, if you like that, or if you're thinking about your existing apps that you already use on Kubernetes, then starting with Helm is probably a better place for you to start. So we've got a couple options there. I'm going to show you both in the fullness of time. If you're totally new to Bicep and you just have no idea what you're looking at, Bicep is an infrastructure as code language. This is my 30-second primer. It's all you're going to need to know about Bicep. If you're familiar with Terraform, Bicep is similar enough. You'll have a very easy time learning it. They're pretty similar, especially in the way that things in the language work. If this is all super new to you, a couple things you will want to know. When you see the resource keyword here, it just means we're going to create a thing. So every time you see the resource keyword, we're going to create a thing. The thing we're going to create is a container. Everything that starts with applications core and so on is stuff that comes from Radius. We'll see a couple more examples later. Parameters kind of have the obvious meaning. So these are just parameters, and it's a way that you get data into the template. An example of this would be a CI/CD pipeline that deploys this application. We probably got a version number we need to pass in. These parameters are going to be set by Radius to basically tell us where we're deploying to. And then lastly, at the top, this import statement, you could think of this, if you're familiar with Terraform, you could think of this as being a lot like a Terraform provider. If you're not super deep in the IAC world, just think of it as like a library for Bicep. So you could think of Radius as a library of types that we could use for Bicep. So I've got my container described here. This actually happens to be right because, conveniently it's my demo. But I mentioned that I want a Redis cache, and I'm just going to add that real quick. And I think my snippet is a little bit out of date. One of the reasons, by the way, that we like Bicep, and we're been working with those folks on this, is that the tooling is really excellent. And it is going to cooperate here and not make a liar out of me. And so it's really easy to find like what's supported, Git completion, validation, tooltips, and stuff for it. So like that was a little bit of out of date, but you could see that I was getting feedback about it right away. And so what's going on here with this Redis cache? So again, we see resource, so we're going to create a thing. We see applications, so this is something that's provided by Radius. And you can think of this as our abstraction for Redis cache. Radius provides a number of abstractions, and we call these either portable resources or standard resources. I think we're still having a debate about what the right term is. But the idea with this is for open source technologies that have multiple hosting models, there's multiple ways to run a Redis cache. We're kind of defining types, like we're kind of defining a library of types. And again, I'm a TypeScript fan, but if you want to think about kind of what TypeScript did for JavaScript, like TypeScript came in and people helped define a bunch of types for things that people would do with the cloud. I think it's appropriate to think about these standard resources that way. So we've defined a type for working with a Redis cache as part of your application. And you'll notice what I didn't say here. What I didn't say here is I didn't say anything about what cloud service to run, whether or not my Redis is running in a container, what security settings it should have applied, and so on. I actually didn't say anything operational about this Redis cache. And that's the way that these standard resources work for us. You're mostly going to use them with a Radius feature called recipes. Backing up a little bit, as part of this step where we ran rad init, and it didn't print this line because my environment was already set up, but if it had been a new setup, this would have printed a line that said something like using recipe pack local dev. And that's because when you set Radius up for dev, we actually include recipes for a bunch of common stuff. And I'll just do that real quick. So I can list the recipes that are in my environment. I know this is a little bit hard to read because of the spacing, but you can see that for a bunch of these applications types, there are recipes that come with Radius when you set it up for dev. And then when you look at these, you can also see like, okay, it says local dev right in the name. So I'm not a liar. And what that's going to enable me to do is when I deploy this to the environment, this Redis cache is going to be fulfilled by whatever recipe is configured in that environment. In my local dev environment, it's going to be these guys. When we go to the cloud, it's going to be different recipes, and we'll get into that when we get there. So I've got my container, I've got my Redis cache. The last thing that I need to do is I need to say something about how these things are connected. And this connections feature is something a little bit, I think this is a little bit unique to Radius. I haven't seen too many other things that work this way. To me, it feels a little bit like Cloud Foundry. So if you say that this feels like Cloud Foundry to me, that I would take that as a compliment. And what's going on here is we're declaring a connection. Connections are named. I named this one Redis. They're named because you can have a lot of different connections. Maybe you talk to a database and a message queue, or maybe you talk to some other microservices in your app. So connections can have names. And that connection is going to this Redis cache database that's going to be created by a recipe. Now, connections are one of those features we want to feel like magic when you use them. And what this connection is going to do is it's going to inject a bunch of settings into the application when I deploy it based on the kind of technology. So if you think about like, well, what do I need to do to connect to Redis? For Redis, you usually need like a URL, username, password, port, whether or not it's using SSL, that kind of information. And different libraries work in different ways, but in general, Radius is going to provide for you all the things that are relevant to that technology. If this were an existing app and I already had a way of getting settings into the app, maybe, for example, and this is great because Copilot's going to come up with some suggestions. Maybe, for example, we're going to use Redis host and Redis port. Well, it's easy for me to do that because this type exposes, again, like I said, we're defining types for these things. This type exposes a bunch of properties that I can use to go interact with that. And I can even get things like validation and completion. So here I can get a warning from the Bicep compiler saying, hey, this is an integer and you're assigning it to a string. What do you want to do? Oh, Copilot's not cooperating for me. Usually Copilot will fix that, by the way. It's not cooperating today. But the way to fix it is to cast it to a string. Anyway, so that connection is going to declare settings like that. If you want to do something different, you can, of course, do something different. If you put a cloud resource in here, like a proprietary one, like an S3 or a Azure storage account, you can actually tell Radius what level of access you want to that thing, and Radius will manage all of the managed identity and IAM permissions and GUI for you, because we know that that's pretty complicated and error-prone to set up on your own. The last thing that this magical connections feature is going to do is it's going to catalog the relationship between these. And I'll show you that when I deploy. We'll be able to reason about after the fact that these two things are connected. And that's going to get really interesting when we go to the cloud. If you've ever want to answer those kinds of questions of like, well, what database server am I actually running on? That's the kind of thing that we're trying to help you with. That's a feature that we call the application graph. We build a big database of kind of all the connections and relationships in the app. So with that connection described, I'm ready to now deploy this. And let me jump back to my command line, and I'm going to say rad run app.bicep. And I've actually got 3 environments here running in the background. I'm just going to run this in my testing environment that I showed you earlier. And so what rad run is going to do is it's going to compile that bicep file. It's going to deploy that to the cluster. So inside my Kubernetes cluster is running a version of the code that processes bicep. And then that engine is going to kind of be an orchestrator for the deployment of the app. That's the thing that actually executes the bicep code. So you can see that my Redis cache finished processing. And then you can see that my container finished processing. And then because I said rad run, we're going to get some streaming logs and we're going to get a port forward. So let me bring this up and I'll open up my window here, and I can browse to the app because we port forwarded it. And so on this page, again, this is an app that we just use to kind of teach people about Radius. You can see a bunch of information about the container. That's not that interesting. But the thing that is interesting here is these settings. So we injected a host name, URL, a port, a connection string into the application. And there's no username and password on this one, which is why they're not there. And you can see that inside this app, we recognize that the connection was there. And then we're just displaying a UI so we can talk about these settings. Over here on this page, we can test out the to-do list. And I think today I will show the community call. We'll add that. Okay. And so to check that, let's jump back to the command line. And we can see that we got a log here from Redis. And we can see that this data actually did hit that database. So I think I think we've shown the community call now that this works, and I can delete that. Let me just get my console back. So let's talk about what I would do next after I get this working. One of the things that I would probably do next is I would probably set up some integration tests, maybe a build pipeline that's going to run my integration tests against a deployed version of the app. And I can actually do everything that I've shown you here. You can actually do that in a CI/CD pipeline. This is kind of how we test Radius. We think that's really good for testing applications. Part of why we built the local dev is for it to be useful to you. And so if you want to try that for testing your applications, we think it's probably a good recipe for you to do that. If I'm happy with how the app might works, I might pick up the phone and ask about getting into a production environment. And I know that Redis, if we kind of pretend like, I know that Redis is one of the technologies that my company supports in production. So if I call up, my ops team or get in touch with whoever I need to touch with, maybe it's an internal portal, and say, hey, I need somewhere for this app to go. Can you tell me where to deploy? And I'm going to deploy to both Azure and AWS for the purposes of this demo. What's going to happen is when I go to those environments, I'm going to rely on the recipes that were set up there by somebody who set up those environments. And so I'm just going to show these really quickly just so folks can get a flavor. I know some of us are coming at this from more the developer point of view, and some of us are coming at it from the operator point of view. Here's a recipe for Azure, and this is a recipe that's written in Bicep. It's going to be used with Azure in my Azure environment. And the kind of anatomy of a recipe is, step one, you get some data from Radius. So this is where we give the recipe information about, like, here's the environment you're deploying to and how it's configured, so that that information doesn't get hard-coded in the recipe. Second of all, the recipe should create whatever resources it needs to create. So in this case, it's a Microsoft Cache for Redis. It's an Azure hosted service that does Redis. And then lastly, I'm going to return some data to Radius that powers that connections experience. So that's the thing that, you saw those settings before. This is where the recipe gets to influence that data. And so you'll probably notice here that, like, well, I'm creating a cloud resource, right? I have to pass the configuration of that. And I think for a lot of us, like, we have some strict requirements about how these things are configured. We want to make sure that they're set up correctly for cost or for security. And that's part of the reason why we have the separation of concerns in Radius. You may be on a team where you work with a lot of operations folks. You may be one of those operations folks or platform engineering folks, they're sometimes called. Or you may not be on a team that works that way, but you probably have some experts on the team that understand the infrastructure, no matter what you're doing. And so this allows a bigger group of people that don't really understand the cloud as well to have a simplified abstraction where they're relying on experts or maybe the open source community to provide the recipes for them. The other recipe I'm going to use with my AWS environment, and this one is written in Terraform. And again, the same kind of pattern. In Terraform, it's conventional to split these things up into files, so I've got them split up here. So you can see we're getting data from Radius. In this file, we're going to create the resources we need to create. And I'm actually just using a module from the public module gallery. The reason why I'm demonstrating it this way is when we've talked to a lot of folks about Radius, a lot of them say, well, we have a big investment in Terraform already, and we'd like to keep that. And so this is an example of how you can use your existing modules and kind of wrap them up into a recipe. So I'm actually calling into something from the public module gallery here, but it would work as well with something you built inside your company. And then over here, we're going to return some data to Radius. Again, kind of same purpose as what we did before. We also taught AWS. This isn't the one I'm going to be using, but we also taught Bicep to use AWS. It's something that's kind of specific to the version that we have in Radius right now. And you could use that. I wanted to make sure that we covered Terraform. So we do a lot of testing with both of these, and they both work pretty well. There's some limitations on the AWS side in Bicep that we're still working on, but I wanted to show that we do have both in case you have a strong preference for one or the other. And you can use Terraform to do AWS. We really want to be unopinionated in Radius and support what community members want. So if I'm the person that's setting up those environments, the thing that I would do is I would come to the command line, and first of all, I would publish. So if it's a Bicep recipe, I would run the rad bicep publish command, and I'd give this, like, here's the file I want to publish, and then here's the registry I want to publish that to. Bicep files are stored in container registries when they're published. That's why that's appearing here. The second thing after publishing that recipe is I need to register it with an environment. So I'd say something like, and I'll just bring it up for my history, rad recipe register. And then, okay, it's a bicep file and it's stored in this registry. And here's the type it's for. And if you want to set any parameters, you can set parameters. So the key is that as an operator or as the person managing the environment, I get to control what recipes are there. And so I not only get to control what kinds of things developers can create and applications can create, but I also get to control how they're configured when they get created. So let's pretend that I did that. I set up my Azure, my AWS environments. And I've actually done that. I've kind of got these in the background. Over here, I'm going to deploy to both. And I'm going to run Azure on this side and AWS on this side. And so I'm going to be doing the deployment in parallel in both of these environments. And I'll remind you at this point that like, I didn't change anything. So like, because we didn't say anything about the place we're deploying to inside the app, we didn't say anything about how Redis is configured or what cloud infrastructure to use. That's being handled by the recipe. I don't have to make any changes to my app because Kubernetes is kind of the same anywhere. And then, you know, the services on Azure and AWS are more or less compatible. So you can see that deployed. We're just finishing up here. And then just to prove that this works, I'm going to show the application graph real quick for both of these, and we'll kind of look at what happened. So I did Azure on that side, and I'm going to do AWS over here. Rad app graph. We'll do AWS on this side. And just, I know that this is a little hard to understand, so let me kind of walk you through it. We're displaying the demo application. There's two components here. There's this demo container. There's the Redis cache that I called DB. You can see that Radius remembered the connection between the two. So we know that this container has a connection to that database. And then this resources section, you can see that here, you can kind of think of this as what Radius did. So when we deployed to Kubernetes or deployed to my Radius environment, Radius created these things for me in Kubernetes. For the Redis cache, since we deployed to Azure, it executed that recipe and we got this Microsoft Redis cache here. And you can see that we can even see the specific one, right? So if you ever wanted to know like who's using that database server or what database server is my app using, those are the kinds of questions that the application graph is designed to answer. Over here on the AWS side, this picture up here for the container is going to be the same. Down here for our Redis cache, you can see that we got some AWS services. So the recipe did its job and provisioned those resources. And as the developer, I didn't really have to know how that was getting configured. I didn't have to make changes to my code. And this is an example of how we can kind of swap infrastructure. And maybe you're not moving between clouds. We know that most folks are not. But if you're moving from dev to test, this is probably relevant to you as well. I want to show one more thing, and I'm not going to actually get to deploy this. It's in a code space, and I know we're really short on time here. If you want to see the Helm version of this, so I showed you the Bicep version of this journey. If you want to see the Helm version of this, we have a tutorial for it, and everything I'm about to show you is from that tutorial. And I'm just going to walk through the same thing from the perspective of a Helm application or an application that's already been described with Kubernetes. And we did this because when we talk to folks, there are a lot of people out there who they liked what we're doing with Bicep. They liked the idea that we're building a new abstraction, but they had a big investment in Kubernetes already. There are also another group of folks we talked to that just they really like living in the Kubernetes world. They're happy using all these tools and so on. And we wanted to make sure that Radius was adoptable for those folks as well. So I'm just going to show what's in this chart. I'm not going to have time to do the full demo, but just to show you what's here and kind of give you a flavor. I'm doing a very typical Helm thing. I've got one container that I'm deploying with this chart, and it's the same application. I'm using Redis in that application. And I'm doing what I think is a very typical thing. I expect that somebody else has already created Redis for me. And I expect that connection info, in this case, a URL, I expect that that's already in a Kubernetes secret somewhere. And so I can just deploy this chart and I'm going to pick up that secret and read it into an environment variable. I'm going to show you how I can turn this into the same demo, because I might have to, the Redis is kind of a pain, right? Like I might have to file a ticket when I need that set up or configured for me, might be kind of a pain to troubleshoot. I learn about radius and recipes, and I want to accomplish the same thing with recipes. So first of all, I can add a recipe here for radius. And so we've built a CRD for recipes so that you can use them from Kubernetes. And this is going to be a good memory test for me. So I'll declare that's not recipe, and that's not right at all. It's rad app IO v1 alpha 3 is the version. And then the kind is going to be recipe. And then to describe this, I'm just going to grab this block here and we'll rename it. So I'll name this DB. And then I don't have to say, just like before, I don't have to say very much for the spec. I have to say what resource type it's going to be. So in this case, it's an applications.data stores, Redis caches, same as in the bicep recipe. So with this, now when I deploy the application, it's actually going to use the recipe in this environment to spin up the Redis cache, just like we saw before in my dev environment. But I want to say something about how these things are connected. And so I can do that with annotations. And the way that I do this is I can say, first of all, radapp IO enabled. So I'll turn Radius on for this deployment. By default, Radius doesn't process any of your stuff. You have to tell us you want us to. And then second of all, I'm going to just declare the connection right here. So I'm going to say connection. I'm going to call that connection Redis just like we did before. And I'm going to say that it goes to that DB recipe that we created before. And then lastly, I don't need this manual secret management anymore because Radius is now going to set the same environment variable for me. And if you still wanted to keep this, like if you had your own settings, there are ways to do that too. But for now, I'm just going to get rid of that. And then I can just deploy this like a normal Helm chart. So I can say Helm install. This is the part I always have trouble remembering. I think I call it demo, and it's going to point at this chart directory and then the namespace demo. I think this is going to fail because I need to create the I need to create the namespace first. Yeah. kubectl. But anyway, this is complaining a little bit. Yeah, no recipes. Oh, I guess it's not installed. But anyway, like I said, I wasn't going to have time to get through this full demo because we're kind of out of time. But if you're interested in this, I'd encourage you, go try that tutorial. We'd love to get your feedback. This is very new. And so we've now got a way for you to use Radius from the point of view of sort of a Kubernetes developer. And we'd love to hear if folks think that this is easy enough, if it's doing the right things, and if there's more you want to see kind of on this front from us.
Awesome.
I'll hand
Thanks
it
so
back.
much, Ryan.
I'll hand it back to Aaron.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, we're right at time, so I'm going to go ahead and just leave with one final slide, and then we'll kind of cover some next steps and kind of what to expect from the Radius community over the next few weeks until our next community call. So I'll get these slides up. And we can stay on as long as anyone on the call would like to stay on for questions and everything. I've been typing away trying to address as many as I can from the chat there. But last slide, just want to thank everyone. This has been an amazing first public community call. So thank you again for everyone for joining and for the amazing questions in the chat. We'll be back. We're still finalizing some dates, tentatively, I think end of the month, but we're still working around like Thanksgiving and some holidays in the US. So we just want to make sure that we can hit everyone while they're still not out of the office. So we'll post all of that to our X account and Threads and into to our community repo. Recording for this call will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel and linked into our community repo, so you can catch this recording later if you joined in a little bit late. But yeah, definitely visit us on Discord. We're going to be, I have it open on my second screen all day, and we're super active in making sure that any issues you hit we jump on right away. And go visit our GitHub repo and give it a star. We'd love to just stay in touch, and that's one way that you can get those updates in kind of your GitHub home screen feed there. And with that, that concludes the formal portion of today's community call. Thanks again, everyone. We will be on as long as there's any questions or chat. And then we can also flip on some mics if anyone just wants to jump on and chat about that. But thanks again. Cool. Cool. And I'll just quickly address. There's a bunch of questions in the chat talking about managed identities and Azure. Yeah, I linked in the chat that we have a page on connections. You can actually define a connection from a container to an Azure resource, and then we go ahead and set up the workload identity, the federation, and the user assigned managed identity and all of that. So if you've ever worked with workload identity, it's a pretty lengthy, like great experience once you get it up and running, but we just want to make it super seamless. So think about just, I need this container to talk to this Azure resource, and when we go up and set all of that up, and let us know if there's any additional configuration. We just kind of the basic, create the user assigned managed identity, do all of that. So, but let us know what you think. We'd love to hear if there's some improvements we can make. And what else? There were some conversations about what if. Yeah, there's a couple things. That's something we've been chatting a little bit about. Today, we have a thing called simulated environments. So you can set up in an environment where you can deploy an application, and it'll tell you that it's deployed, and you can interact with the APIs and understand kind of what types of things would happen. But we actually don't go off and render or create any of those other resources. So it allows you to do a form of what if. We've been chatting about like a deep what if. Being able to say, hey, this recipe would run, but if it were to, here's all the resources that it would actually go off and provision. So it's kind of that next layer down to like go deeper into the recipe. So that's something we've been thinking about and is kind of on our backlog. And then we were also chatting about recipes. Today we have Bicep and Terraform. Somebody asked about like what about imperative commands or like scripting? And this is something we'd love to hear more about. It sounds like the AZ CLI or PowerShell is a popular one. So perhaps through, we've talked about like a bring your own container where, hey, you define a container image that goes off and does something. And with the recipe drivers, there's this thing called a recipe contract. And Ryan showed that in his demo of like the context input and then the result output. So, and this is something where we don't have a formal design yet, but feel free to join us in Discord or on GitHub. We can talk through kind of what you would like to see that experience look like. I don't know, Ryan, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Oh, I would just say like we're unopinionated about the technologies that people use in recipes. I think our list and how we're thinking about it is we know that the two things that we hear a lot, we're hearing a lot now that we have Bicep and Terraform, we're hearing a lot about I want a Helm chart to be my recipe. And we're also hearing a lot about I want to run a script or I want to execute a container as a recipe, which that would probably be the way we would do it. So those are two things that we know about. If you're really interested in either of those use cases, we would love to chat with you specifically about it. The other one that we're interested, and again, we would love to talk to people that already have approaches that they're using. We were just having a conversation about Crossplane the other day, and there are some people that are kind of interested in like, well, what if my recipe could just be a thing that does something to Crossplane, which also seems attractive. So I think the message from me is we're not trying to be opinionated about which technologies you use. I think in the fullness of time, we'll support a lot of different technologies for recipes.
Cool. Any other questions we can help answer? Otherwise, yeah, Discord's always, we'll be on all day and all week. So happy to, if there's any follow-ups there as well. But yeah, Ryan, you also jumped in the chat. Please let us know kind of feedback on the community call itself. This is our first time doing it publicly, and we used a Teams webinar. And let us know if there were issues joining, if there's any improvements we can make, if there's just friction along the way. We just want to make this as seamless. So we're going to be tweaking this and just making sure we have the right experience. So please let us know kind of how this experience was. Cool. I think that is all the questions in the chat. Any final thoughts, Jonathan, Ryan's, or anyone before we conclude today's community call?
That's it for me.
Glad to finally be public and in the open.
Yeah, it's exciting, and we look forward to meeting as many of you as we can at KubeCon, and look forward to seeing you on Discord and on GitHub. Thanks for everybody's time.
Fantastic.
Thanks, y'all.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.